Sakpase Chingus, it's your girl Kathleen, aka Kasurin, aka Sorin, and we are back for another episode of Sorin Soapbox. Here on Sorin Soapbox is where we talk about all things love, life, and the plot twist that comes with both. Get into it, get into it. We are back with another episode. I'm trying to be consistent and we're trying to keep this ball rolling. For anybody that's new to Sodium Soapbox, I want to say welcome, welcome, welcome. We love new people around here. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to listening to your girl. We got a lot to talk about today, so I'm excited. I'm looking forward to today's topic. So again, if you are new, welcome. Kick off your shoes, relax your feet, get you something to drink, get you some water, get you some coffee, get you some tea. If it's late in the evening, get you a little wine, whatever is your preference, because we're going to get into it today. I got a few things on the docket today. And if you are a returning listener, I appreciate you and I thank you for coming back again. I thank you for your support and coming in and hanging out with your girl for a little bit. So as I said, we got a lot on the docket today. I'm going to try my best to be consistent and putting out these episodes twice a month or at least every other week. I'm going to do my best. Y'all pray for me because I'm not going to lie, it's a bit overwhelming, but I know it's just about me getting back on the bike and finding my footing. Child, I'm currently recording in my closet because as soon as I hit record, that's when the people wanted to start mowing the lawn and using a leaf blower. And it's like 3 p.m. right now. I don't know what's going on, but the show must go on. So here we are. Normally, I would start off the episode with what I like to call Sodium's life update, where I basically just kind of talk about what I've been going through since the last episode, honestly. So this past week, I hung out with my best friend and her husband and their daughter. I just had a really great time. I always enjoy hanging out with my best friend. Since moving to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which I talked about moving in the last episode, but I specifically live in Tulsa. Since moving here and being close to her, it's honestly just been a blessing. If you've heard any of my past episodes, I've talked about her. I talk about how she's my soulmate because I don't believe that soulmates are solely romantic. I believe you can find a platonic soulmate if you have someone who's like your best friend, whether it comes in a form of your sister or any sibling for that matter. I truly believe that you can find your soulmate in friends and someone who just understands you. So being able to just hang out with her and spend time with her and the baby, just honestly, it was healing. We didn't do much. We just kind of kicked it and chilled around the house, but I was able to just help her in taking care of her daughter so she can kind of get some rest because my girl is pregnant with baby number 2 and she looks like she could pop at any moment, but she's like 7.5 months pregnant, but she looks like she could have this baby at any point in time. So other than that, it just was a pretty chill 2 weeks for me. School starts back up this month and I'm currently a substitute teacher and they've already got like a full schedule for me. I'm already being called in like the second day of school as well as a couple weeks later. Things have been really good for me if I'm being honest. I don't really have any complaints about where I'm at right now. Obviously, last episode I talked about the ups and downs I've been experiencing and I'm not going to say all of the feelings that I have dissipated, but I can say that God has just been helping me to deal with my emotions, deal with my feelings one day at a time. And that's all I can really do at this point. But yeah, other than that, I don't really have much to give. I know once school starts though, that's going to be a whole nother situation in and of itself. And I'm going to have to map out my recording, but that's another situation for another day. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up my Sodium's life update. I'd love to hear from my listeners and find out how your past 2 weeks is going. I know a lot of kids are going back to school this month, so I know some of the parents are excited because they got their kids in them at a house and home these past couple of months. So, I don't have those issues, praise God, not yet. But I can imagine how parents have had to go through the summer months and keep their kids occupied and find them stuff to do so they still are essentially active the same way that they are during school. But yeah, so with that out of the way, I just want to talk about some pop culture news today. I'm trying to think of different segments that I want to add to the podcast since I'm trying to revamp it and change it. But yeah, I kind of want to transition into some pop culture stuff. And specifically, this debate that's going all over TikTok that I saw today about Beyonce being a bigger legend than Michael Jackson. And I'm not going to lie, I think I'm surprised by this conversation. Not because Beyonce isn't who she is and isn't a living legend. I mean, like, this girl has changed the game in her own rights, in her own merits. Just between the Renaissance album and Cowboy Carter. And I'm not like a Beehive or a diehard Beyonce fan, but I know when to give credit where credit's due. And I'm looking forward to Act 3. Some are hinting that it will be a rock album, some are hinting that it's a hip hop album. I think I'm leaning towards the rock album just because I saw a lot of the hinting she was doing for Tina Turner, and I think it would be a really cool way to see how she honors Tina Turner in her career, because I can say that Beyonce is definitely trying to show that she can fit into any genre. And let's be honest, every genre is inspired by Black culture and by Black music. So Beyonce deciding to do various genres across the board, I think rock just makes sense. But maybe she does do hip hop. I don't know. I know Beyonce has a crazy creative mind. But going back to the topic at hand, Beyonce versus Michael Jackson just doesn't make sense to me, because there would be no Beyonce without Michael Jackson, right? Think about the Jackson 5 and them coming up in Motown culture. And Motown culture being everything that it is during the time of like Jim Crow era and segregation. You have groups like the Temptations, you got groups like the Supreme, you have Jackson 5, you have all of these groups coming out in the same era and breaking strides in the music industry in ways that, like, everything was stacked up against them. Nothing was supposed to go their way. They weren't supposed to succeed in the music industry the way that they did. And yet, these are the greats. And then for Jackson 5 to come through and just basically wipe the industry clean, only for it to be a stepping stone for Michael Jackson to essentially create his own solo career and be what we know him today. I'm sorry, there's no way we could have a conversation saying that Michael Jackson and Beyonce are even remotely in the same playing field, because they're not. I just saw a TikTok video where it basically was saying that Michael Jackson, to this day, 15 years later after his passing, is still making 10 to 11 million streams on his Spotify daily. 10 to 11. And Beyonce's making 12 million, but she's still alive and she's still dropping music and dropping projects and this, that, and the third. And it's just like, I don't think we'll ever have another Michael Jackson. I know people try to say Usher is similar to Michael Jackson or Chris Brown. These guys aren't making numbers. They're not doing numbers like Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's blueprint for the Jackson 5 and Joe Jackson's Strive is what gave Matthew Knowles the inspiration to create Destiny's Child. And I think people forget that. I think people forget Beyonce's roots. And maybe not everybody. Maybe it's just the people who are having this debate. But literally, Destiny's Child was inspiration from the Jackson 5. Just like a lot of the boy bands we experience today. We wouldn't have had, if it wasn't for the Jackson 5, we wouldn't have had New Edition. If it wasn't for New Edition, we wouldn't have had Kids on the Block. If it wasn't for Kids on the Block, we wouldn't have had NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and so on and so forth. There's nobody. Michael Jackson inspires the K-pop culture. If you've been listening to me, you know I've talked about K-pop culture. You know I lived in Korea. There's no way you're saying someone's superseding Michael Jackson or that Beyonce is even remotely in the same league. Now, obviously, we might know later down the road in the future when she's retired or whatever the case may be, and she has inspired the next generation of musicians and artists, that we could say, okay, this is where Beyonce's hand is on, because we see that the upcoming artists are following in her footsteps. They're emulating her. They're doing the music similar to her. But even I saw this guy who was on TikTok who was breaking the conversation down, and he was saying that Michael Jackson essentially turned MTV from a racist program to what we knew today. Or even, I don't want to even say today, because technically we don't have the same MTV, but MTV was solely a rock station. They had artists like David Bowie and whoever else, in the 80s. And because Michael Jackson was making such strides, they had to include him in their lineup, in their music, because they were on 24-hour rotation. And to ignore and neglect Michael Jackson when that's what the people wanted, they had to submit to that. They had to essentially honor that. And Michael Jackson was on radio stations that were originally solely playing rock music. They played him on the rotation. Radio stations that were solely playing like black artists, they put Michael Jackson on radar, especially when Thriller dropped. Thriller literally transcended genres and it went against the grain. There was no way that a show like MTV, and because of Michael Jackson's like stellar music career, MTV had to write his coattail. We can't say the same thing for Beyonce. We can't say that Beyonce forced certain industries to bow down to her essentially. Now, yes, Cowboy Carter definitely reflected that country music originally belonged to Black people, that we were the originators. And I'm not going to, again, I won't take that away from her. I just don't think there's enough correlation between the two. Because if we think about it, we don't have radio the same way we had radio back then. MTV, BET, all of these shows back then that were heavily influenced by the people voting, what was blowing up on chart numbers, we don't have that today. We can get music instantly today versus it's like you had to go buy CDs, you had to buy singles, you had to call in to request for songs, you had to go vote for your songs. That's not the same. During Destiny's Child, that obviously was a later result of it, but during the 80s and the early 90s, that wasn't something that Beyonce had on her side. So it's like you can't really compare it now. Like the same guy mentioned, we don't have billboards anymore. There used to be billboards with Michael Jackson's face on it. We don't have that same comparison. Think about the J14 magazines, the Teen Pop magazines, all of these that were also pushing Michael Jackson. I still can't get over, and I apologize, I don't know the name of the concert, but I would never get over the concert when Michael Jackson pops out from under the stage and stands there for a good 5-10 minutes, maybe longer, and people are passing out. People are passing out. Again, no hate, no shame to Beyonce. She has not hit that type of fandom, that type of legacy or legendom, whatever you want to call it. She has not hit that. And that will forever be the comparison is, can Beyonce stand on a stage and not say nothing and people pass out? Now, granted, I'm not saying that's a best caliber, but that's the image that sticks in my head, is that man getting up there on that stage, popping out, and just nothing, no words, just his I'm sorry. You're not going to tell me Chris Brown can do that. You're not going to tell me Usher can do that. Like, and that's the other thing. These artists, well, I'm not going to include Beyonce in this conversation, but I love Usher. But the fact that Usher's whole gimmick now is feeding girls cherries and giving out roses, and he's got strippers and he's roller skating, it's all part of like to basically give a new flavor to his music, because it's like now you have to do a little bit more to really get your crowd engaged. I'm sorry, Michael Jackson just standing there, nothing else. The crowd didn't need nothing else. His presence was all that they needed. I'm sorry. Again, love Beyonce down. I am looking forward to what her career unfolds. But I think, one, we tend to forget that Matthew Knowles was inspired by Joe Jackson. Whether directly or indirectly, I don't have the source to prove it. But it's the reason why we ended up with Destiny's Child. And then when Destiny's Child retired, it's how we got Beyonce. She followed the Jackson 5 formula to the T. So we wouldn't have Beyonce if it wasn't for Michael Jackson. So I'm going to just say and wrap this up, put some respect on that man's name. And because that man's legend transcends. Again, that man is the reason why we have K-pop in the way that it is, because he is so affluent in Asian cultures. And I'm not saying that Michael Jackson is the sole reason for K-pop, but it is definitely a very strong correlation between the two. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to put my 2 cents into that conversation because I thought it was interesting. I was like, oh, this is actually a debate. We actually believe that the answer isn't obvious, but I realized we live in a day and age that people, I'm not going to go there. I'm just still surprised that this is a conversation that's being had. Again, I think you would have to compare numbers. You would have to compare. There needs to be a lot of comparison because, again, Beyonce is living in a time where we consume music completely different than the way music was consumed when Michael Jackson was coming up. So I think people are forgetting that we couldn't stream music. You had to wait for the music to play on the radio or wait for the music video to pop up on TV. You had to request songs. You had to do a lot more to get the music that you wanted versus today. It's like if you only want to consume Beyonce, you have that ability to. If you only want to consume one artist, you can, and it doesn't have to be compared or in contest with another artist. The nuance is missing when we're talking about who's the bigger legend, who's the greater legend, Beyonce or Michael Jackson. And I think if you didn't grow up, one, in America, and two, during that time, to see the elevation of Michael Jackson's career, you're going to make assumptions about his career. Because the fact that I heard someone say, oh, Jackson 5 was gimmicky, are you kidding me? Yeah, don't get me started. Don't get me hyped. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. I'd love your thoughts. Do you think that Beyonce is a bigger legend than Michael Jackson? Do you think she's hit more strides or hit more goalposts than Michael Jackson? Or are you team Michael Jackson? Or do you think that both of them have done a lot in their music careers in their lives, and this is not even a conversation, it's comparing apples to oranges? Because again, I think I'm on the air of both artists are really good and really amazing in their own spaces. I don't think it's right to compare the two because again, we will never have another Michael Jackson. I don't even see someone who remotely touches, and this could be blasphemous, so I apologize. I don't see anyone who's even touching the hem of Michael Jackson's garment. I'm sorry. I don't see it, but I also know that Beyonce has done a lot for the culture and a lot for the music industry. I will end it with that note. So moving on, we are getting to the meat and potatoes of today's episode. Your girl is going to be adding Sexologist to her resume? Question mark. Let's get into it. Let's break this down. So at the end of last episode, I talked about how I felt God was leading me to be a sexologist. And trust me, just saying that out loud on air scares me because the more I say it out loud, the more real it feels. And that's very scary. So kind of what I want to do for the rest of this episode is backtrack and talk about how I got to this conclusion, right? The same way we work out a math problem, we have the answer. Let's backtrack and solve this equation, figure out how I got here. You know, kind of like the TikTok. I bet you're wondering how I got here. Well, let's figure out how did I get here. So let's backtrack to, I guess in general, I've never been someone afraid to talk about sex. And in the context of me being a pastor's kid, I think for some people that's strange. But I realize, like, in thinking back, I've never shied away from sex conversations. Now, that's not to say I haven't been in conversations that maybe I was too young to be a part of, but I never cringed, I never whispered, I never hid when it came to sex conversations because I felt like this is a normal part of life. The same way you talk about showering, the same way you talk about marriage, the same way you talk about, I don't know, just day-to-day conversations. I felt like sex wasn't a conversation that should be behind closed doors, so to speak. So I want to lead with that I've never been someone who's afraid of talking about sex, so much so that people questioned whether, you know, I was a virgin, whether I was loose or fast or this, that, and the third. People just would question me because they felt like I was just a little too comfortable with talking about it, especially once I was in church spaces and I was talking with my friends and I was just like, well, God created sex. Why are we afraid to talk about it? I don't really understand. And so it wasn't until college where I had just graduated and I had a couple credits left over and I needed to take an elective to basically finish out my degree. And so I saw that there was an online class called Healthy Sexuality. And I said, oh, this sounds like a good class. Let me take it. And it came with a book called I believe it's called Healthy Sexuality by Clifford and Heather Penner, if I'm not mistaken. And when I tell you, I ate this class and this book up. It just was like, I don't know, something in my brain just came alive. And I was like, oh my God, this is such a good book. This is such good information. I was excited to talk about what I was learning in the class. I would tell my friends, yeah, I'm taking this class. And I would just talk about what I learned because I just was so engulfed in this book and in this class. And I remember at the end of the class, because I think it was like a 6-week or 8-week class because it was online, I said to myself, I would love to be a sex therapist. And then at the same time, the thought came to mind, ain't no way I'm about to be a sex therapist. One, because I had already fought tooth and nail to graduate at the time that I did, because your girl was on that 5-year, I was on that 5-year college plan. And that was already hard for me because I remember having to fight with the school to get me to graduate because I think I only had a few credits left. And then only for me to set up my graduation and my parents ended up not coming or not wanting to come, I should say. And that's a conversation for another day, for another episode. But I was finishing out those credits and I was like, there's no way I can, one, add more years to my college, experience, so to speak. There was no way I was about to tell my father, who's a pastor, and my parents, who are immigrants, look them in the eyeball and say, I want to be a sex therapist. It was out of the question for me. No way, no how. I wasn't going to do it. And yeah, so the truth is, once I left school and realized I was never going to tell anybody out loud that I was going to be a sex therapist, I thought I let the dream die. But sure enough, every time people would talk about, oh, what was your dream job? What was your dream as a kid? What did you want to be? And I would always have two answers. Number one, I wanted to be a background dancer for Janet Jackson. That was my number one dream as a kid growing up, was that I wanted to be the background dancer for Janet Jackson. And two, I wanted to be a sex therapist. Very different, dreams and goals. But these two things I knew for sure, especially wanting to be a sex therapist. But again, I figured like, oh, I had long been out of college. There was no way I was going to go back to school. And I at the time wasn't thinking about getting my master's degree. So I was just like, okay, like put it to bed again. And even when I did get my master's degree, because I was so determined to have my own record label and be a part of the music industry, I did end up going back to school to get my master's in entertainment business. Because in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be, I'm going to have my own record label. I'm going to have my roster of artists. I'm going to have the PR team, this, that, and the third. And even when I went to Korea, I looked into different ways to network with those in the music industry to figure out how to get my foot in the door, how to make connections, how to just, again, network in the K-pop scene because that was coming up and blowing up. So I was like, oh, what better place to be than to be in Korea, working with Korean artists. And I thought that was a different avenue for me. But time and time again, the idea of being a sex therapist kept coming up. And I was like, to be honest, I just kept saying it was too late for me. It was too late. It was too late. It was too late. There was no way I was going back to school because I was already drowning in student debt. So I just didn't think it was a plausible thing for me. Meanwhile, I had friends who were collecting degrees like they were Pokemon balls, but I just didn't think that was an option for me. I didn't think it made sense to get 2 master's degrees or to go back to school and do all of those things, especially without justification to my parents as to why I was doing it. And I know you could easily be like, oh, well, you didn't need your parents' approval, this, that, and third. Obviously, yeah, if you haven't grown up in an immigrant household, especially a Caribbean household, then you, my friend, you don't understand. It is not easy to just do things of your own volition without, getting feedback or unwanted opinions from your parents. Because essentially it's like, oh, well, we're the ones that's paying for your student loans and this, that, and the third. And I wasn't in a place to try and go back to school financially by myself. Like, let's be honest. So again, time and time again, I just laid the dream down and said, it's not realistic for me. It's not possible. It's a dream that I can think of, but it's not something that I necessarily have to walk out. Because I think we all have dreams. And ideas of like, oh, I wanted to have this business, or I wanted to be a dancer, or I wanted to be an architect, or I wanted to be, an engineer, or I don't know, you wanted to be a painter or a singer, but because of life circumstances, it wasn't feasible, it wasn't realistic. And you tend to just lay those dreams down. And I can be honest to say that it's unfortunate that we don't live in a world that whatever your dreams and goals or aspirations are, you can't go out and pursue them. But this is the reality of life. And that's how I took being a sex therapist, was that the reality of life is this is not reachable or attainable for me. And then came Korea. I already told y'all, Korea was a wilderness season for me. It was a lot of me leaning into God and spending time with Him and trusting Him and laying my own self down at the altar, because I just was like, what is happening here? I'm enjoying myself while living in a whole nother country, but it's also COVID. And again, as I said in the previous episode, I wasn't making friends. I wasn't connecting with people the way that I want to, because for those of you who don't know me, I don't do surface conversations. I don't do surface relationships. If you want to be pen pals, I promise you're not getting my full energy. I'm just giving you bare minimum. That's not something I enjoy. I don't enjoy Facebook messaging, texting people all day, all night, and there's not a gradual progression in wanting to know what your dreams and aspirations are. What are your fears? What are your struggles? And it's not to trauma bond in any way. I just like to know what's under the surface when it comes to people that I'm dealing with. So if my relationship with you seems very surface, just know that means, for lack of better words, we're not that close. And I hate to say that, but it's very true. Like, I hate small talk. I don't know how we got here, but here we are. I hate small talk. I hate chit chat. It grates on me. And if the extent of our conversation is, hey, how you doing? How was your day? What are you doing right now? What are you watching? What are you this? What are you that? I'm just like, all right, I'm over the conversation. I'm over it. I will send voice notes. My voice notes sound like podcast episodes because I'm a yapper. I love people who yap back, and it's just a yapping tennis match. And you're telling me about your dreams and your goals. You tell me what God is doing in your life. You're telling me about, I don't know, even if it's something simple like, oh, I'm watching this movie or this documentary or this anime. I want to know the people who come into my life. But anyways, the fact of the matter is, I hated the fact that I didn't feel like any of my friendships were beyond the surface. And I also understand that it's a cultural thing, so I can't be mad for real. It's, Koreans, and not just Koreans, but the people that I just met over there, it just wasn't a norm to go below the surface. So that just meant I had a lot of time between me and Jesus. And so I'm watching this Netflix series, and I think it was a South African reality show where they had couples coming on who had been married, some married for 10 years, some married 20 years, some who were newly engaged, some who were newlyweds. They just ranged from different spectrums when it came to dating and marriage. And they were trying to work out their relationships to determine, was this a marriage that would allow them to continue forward, or did they need to go their separate ways? And the professional who was sitting with these couples was a relationship therapist, but she also delved in healthy sexuality. So her main title was that she was a family and marriage therapist, but she also had background in sexuality, healthy sexuality, all the things. And I'm watching the episodes and hearing how she's talking and how she's guiding the couples. And I started bawling my eyes out. I started just weeping. And I had to sit myself and I'm like, why am I crying like this? And as clear as day, it was just like, because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what you've been wanting to do. You've been wanting to be a sex therapist, a sexologist. I realized later on the better term was sexologist, but we'll get into that in a sec. But I was like, this is what you've wanted to do your whole life. And you have been, quote unquote, putting it to bed, burying it, and it kept coming back up. And this was a time where I couldn't bury it anymore. I couldn't put it to bed anymore. It just was very much like in my face. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced where you thought you would let a dream die and figured you're just going to redirect yourself and do, I don't know, a realistic job or have a realistic career, whatever the case may be, because maybe your dream requires you to step out in faith, or it requires you to, be uncomfortable, step outside of your comfort zone type of thing. And I realized that these were all the feelings that were coming up in wanting to be a sexologist, like I said. But yeah, I realized that in acknowledging that I wanted to be a sexologist, it meant having to have uncomfortable conversations. It meant having to be comfortable with the looks I get when I tell people that's what I want to do. It has to do with me being comfortable with having a conversation with my parents about this, which I haven't fully done. I've hinted that I wanted to be a sexologist, and the response that I was met with was, how are you going to be a sexologist when you're single? As if this disqualifies me. But that's exactly what I'm talking about, is having those hard conversations. It's like, am I ready to do that? And I didn't know if I was equipped to. I just knew that it was in that moment, sitting in my bed, watching the show, crying, that I said, okay, God, if this is what you want me to do, then I pray that you would open up the pathways, open up opportunities, connect me with my helpers in order to get me to step fully into this purpose, into this calling that you had. And so one of the first things I did was, there was 2 women, Black women who are already operating in this space, and I sent them a DM and just said, hey, I'm thinking about being a sexologist, and I'd love to just pick your brain for a few minutes and just find out how you got into this space, how you're navigating, especially as a Christian. Because again, my biggest concern and my biggest issue over the years has been, we don't talk about sex enough in the church. Sex is like Bruno. We don't talk about it. Like, we don't talk about it. Or if you do, you only talk about it with married people. And I don't want to say by that point it's too late, but how do you expect people to go from being single to being married, and all of a sudden there's a light switch that I now feel comfortable to have sex with someone? And this is off the basis that you're not already having sex, right? Because if we're talking about the traditional biblical way, you're not supposed to be having sex till after you get married. Again, I understand for some people that's a hot button to talk about, but the reality is, if we're not supposed to have sex till we get married, what makes you think that I'm going to have desire for my husband the moment we say I do, the moment we step into the hotel room? Like, what are we talking about here? I haven't been equipped. I don't have any information. I don't have any, I have no clue. I have no idea. But somehow, some way, I'm supposed to now desire my husband the moment I say I do. Where do they do that at? Where do they do that at? I'm so sorry. That's not realistic. And let's not talk about the harm that purity culture has created, especially when it comes to women versus men. Men can sow their royal oath, but women we have to be pure, and we have to be this and that and the third. So that was one of the things that frustrated me and angered me, was the fact that the sex conversations only happen with married folks. And obviously, I'm not saying that the same conversation should be had across the board, but I think there should be some conversation on both sides. And then there's a conversation where men get a pass if they mess up, if they slip up, versus girls don't get that. Girls are getting the message where the instructor is passing a rose around and everybody's supposed to pull a petal off until the rose is wilted, and that's what a woman represents if she's been used and been with, X amount of guys. Men don't get that. Imagine if somebody stood in front of the class with a pencil, an unused pencil, and then every person sharpened it till they got to the end. That's not the conversation men are having. Child, let me get off that soapbox for a second. But the fact of the matter is, these were the conversations, without realizing it, that upset me and my homegirls. And it wasn't until God brought that to my memory that I was like, oh, this has always been something that's been on my heart. This has always been something that I've had a passion for and a desire for. Because it's like, I literally don't understand. Why is it that if the church is supposed to be the spearhead, if you're supposed to be the center of where all of our knowledge and things come from a Christian perspective, I want to clarify that. Why are we shying away from something like that's so important? Because most of the people in the church are not getting their information and knowledge about sex from the church. They're getting it from their friends. They're getting it from media. They're getting it from, everywhere else but. So that makes no sense to me. So needless to say, after having my informational interview with a couple of different Christian sexologists, because again, I was curious how they operate in that space, I was like, okay, I'm going to read the books that they recommended to me and do my own research, do my own homework. And then it basically got to this point now where I have a mentor who, honestly, she's the best. I love her. And she gonna have to figure out a way to get rid of me because I'm stuck with her. This is not my third mentor. I have a therapist that she can't get rid of me. I have a business mentor. Shout out to Ashley. She can't get rid of me. And now I have my mentor, which I'm gonna keep her anonymous until otherwise. But the three of them, I said, oh God, you got me set up. You got me covered, because my therapist is literally me in the future. I look at her and she looks at me and she says, I'm her in the past. She's me in the future. My business mentor, she don't play no games. She don't play no games. And that's, when I tell you, she a boss chick. That's my girl. And then, yeah, my sexologist sexology mentor, I should say. We've only had a couple sessions and I'm like, she can't get rid of me. I'm stuck. But yeah, all in all, I realized like it's always just been in me, that this has always been my path and my calling, which is crazy because although this didn't age well, I wanted to be the female Diddy. Anybody who knows me knows I would say that regularly. I wanted to be the female Diddy. We're not talking about baby oil and freak offs. We're not talking about that. I meant from a business music mogul perspective. The way now that I learned he doesn't do business well. He shortchanged artists and he owes artists money. He's done shiesty business. I now know that now. But at the time in college and younger, it made sense. I'm like, Bad Boy Records, Bad Boy Industry, Enterprise. This man was everywhere when it came to business. And so for me, I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And it was very clear. God was like, yeah, that's not what you want. That may be what you want, but that's not what I want for you. So obviously, one thing about God, he don't play about me. He definitely was like, yeah, we're not doing that. We're not gonna do that. But at the end of the day, this was always what God had for me. Scary, crazy, but yeah. So I wanted to kind of take you on the journey on how I got here and wanting to be a sexologist and wanting to help Black and brown women find freedom and relinquish shame and guilt when it comes to their bodies and having a healthy sexuality in context to what God has for us, because it was not taught that way. And I want to redeem the conversation that we've been having in the church about sex and put it under the light. There was sex in the garden. It wasn't something that happened after the fall. It wasn't something that happened once the world turned upside down. So yeah, I would be lying if this didn't terrify me, but I'm definitely going to be using this platform to bring these conversations to light, to feel comfortable having these conversations, so that at whatever point God opens up other doors, other opportunities, I've kind of already worked that muscle to get to this point. So yeah, I hope that, as always, I hope that you hear my heart when I talk about sex and healthy sexuality and the hurts and pains of purity culture, among other things. And these are topics that I definitely plan to bring to my podcast, to the future episodes, because as I'm learning, I want to bring y'all on this journey with me. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up today's episode. I want to thank you all again for tuning in, for listening to yet another episode. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, I'd love to hear them. Again, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do about my other IG page. So for now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your comments, from the Beyonce versus Michael Jackson conversation to healthy sexuality in the church, especially if you grew up Christian and grew up in the church. I'd love your thoughts and perspective. Ideally, in the future, I'd love to take in Q&A and do a whole episode around the questions that I receive and just kind of delve into them. I know in the upcoming episodes, I'll probably talk about a lot of the things that I've learned in the books that I was given for homework, because child, when I tell you it's a plethora of information, I could talk about this. I could talk about this topic for hours. I can't tell you. I get excited when people ask me sex questions, and I should have known already off rip that this was my purpose, my calling, because I've always been like that. Somebody brought up a sex topic, I would be wide-eyed and bushy-tailed ready to talk about it. What you trying to talk about? Like, let's get into this for real. As Salt and Pepper said, let's talk about sex. Okay? So I'm looking forward to having conversations about the books that I've read, the information that I'm receiving, hearing your questions. And yeah, I'm hoping that you will stick with me on this journey because, child, this is a plot twist that I didn't see coming. That's why the new intro is where we talk about love, life, and the plot twists that come with both. Because, child, I didn't see this one coming. But yeah, reach out to me, hit me up on my IG. The username is Kathleen Tanya _ that is KATHLEENTANIA_ Again, tell me your thoughts, tell me your concerns. I'd love some questions if you have any, or even encouragement, because again, I'm scared, but I'm gonna do this scared. So until next time, your girl is off her soapbox. See ya.